be here with you all, and I'm actually going to share a slideshow that will kind of walk us through what I'm going to be talking about. But I was thrilled when Peg reached out to me to see if I would be able to be willing to talk, and we chatted back and forth, lots of emails to kind of talk about what might be useful for you all during this time. So I'm thrilled, really thrilled that there are so many of you that have shown up here. So I'm going to share my screen, and that will get us going, and then probably take about half an hour just to chat about some communication principles and perspectives that are real practical, that you can look at to think about how do you talk to people who might be different and have different opinions, and do it in such a way that is consistent with the values of your church, but also consistent with your own personal values of being respectful. And so I will have some time at the end for some questions and answers. And but at this point, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started, just to keep us on track here. So hopefully you can see that and be able to see the screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Okay, I see lots of thumbs up here. So and I named this talk with malice towards none, and you may be familiar with that. That is actually a term that President Abraham Lincoln used during those difficult times of our nation, back preceding and during the Civil War era. And let me just kind of give you a little bit of background about myself so that you can know why it is that I am actually talking today. I am a professor of communication, applied communication at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I've been there since 2015. And my background really is looking at dialogue, difficult dialogues between people. And so I have really started connecting. And we'll just see if we can mute. I don't know who that is, Dane, but maybe you can mute them just briefly. And I have started, because of my interest in looking at difficult dialogues, I have been involved with an organization called Braver Angels. And Braver Angels is an organization that started in 2016 after the presidential election. And after President Trump was originally elected. And there were people in the state of Ohio that both were Reds and Blues, and they wanted to know how they could talk to each other and to do it in a way that was respectful, even though they might have been extremely disappointed or happy about the election results. And so I've been connected with that organization, and am now actually the co-chair of the Central Arkansas Alliance of Braver Angels. I know, Meg, you've come to a couple of our programs, and so I'm hoping this will be an opportunity to invite, and I'll tell you about a couple of things at the end of my presentation here that might give you an opportunity to get involved with this a little bit more. So Braver Angels, as I said earlier, is a citizens movement that started in 2016. We have over 10,000 members, and there's about 90 in the state of Arkansas that have paid a $12 a year dues to be a member of the organization. And our goal is to really encourage understanding and respect. We believe that we can find common ground and shared values. And in order to do that, we know that we've got to encounter or enter into difficult conversations. I was recently in a workshop with Braver Angels that was a national workshop. It was actually out of Southern California, held over Zoom, and so Zoom gives us the opportunity to meet people that we wouldn't normally meet. And one of the guys at the end of the workshop said, you know, I had very little hope when I came into this workshop that I was going to be able to ever talk to somebody from the other side. And he said, after the workshop, he said, I feel like there's hope, and that there's actually a lot of more people in the middle that are seeking or willing to seek common ground than there are on the outside. He says, but our media really tries to portray it as we are so different from the the outside, that he said, I'm really mad now at the media and how it's portraying the right and the left, so that it looks like that we don't have anything that we can talk to each other about. So the Braver Angels is putting together an initiative that's called With Malice Towards None. And if you look on their website and just type in braverangels.org, they will actually give you some resources that you would like to be involved with in your church. That's called With Malice Towards None. And the goal is to try to get people to actually sign a pledge that says this. And I want you to look at these words. They're pretty powerful. And if I think about the way that I want to live, regardless of whether we are polarized as we are in our nation now, or I want to live this way. My guess is because you're part of this community that you do as well. But even if it wasn't about an election, I don't want to hold hate or disdain or ridicule for those who are different than me. And the way that this is worded is assuming post-election, that we don't want to hold this, but I don't want to hold this anytime. Says, whether I'm pleased or upset about the outcome, I will seek to understand the concerns and aspirations of those who voted differently, and will look for opportunities to work with people with whom I disagree. And if you want to take the word election out of there, if you're not interested in the politics of it, I think all of us probably in our core really want to seek to understand other people. We really want to work together across our differences. But it takes work in order to do that, because there's a tendency to stay within and have conversations only within with the people that are like us. We see this with Facebook, just as an example. And I joined Facebook years ago. My sister said, you need to join it so you can see pictures of our family. I lived a long way away from where she lived. And so she's like, you just need to join it. It used to be a place where we would be socially able just to connect. But now it's become such a place of divide, with people posting things. It's difficult sometimes, and then you push like on things, and it's difficult at times to realize that sometimes what that does is every time we push a like on something, we get more of the same kind of feed in our feed, so that it eventually puts us into people who are just alike, like us. I try really hard to look at, I may not like them, but at least to spend a couple of minutes looking at positions that are opposite of me on Facebook, in order to be able to make sure that I keep getting in my feed things that are different, so that I'm kind of I'm trying to make the Facebook algorithms, those people, robots that are behind the scene in Facebook. I don't know if they're robots, maybe they're people, but the algorithms that they put together to try to say what I should see, I'm trying to make them realize that I want to see more than just my own opinion. But that's difficult to do whenever we originally just want to go in there and have, be social with somebody. So today we're going to talk about a sampling of Braver Angel skills, which are also things that I teach in my communication classes. Even before I became a part of Braver Angels, I really would teach the kinds of things that I'm talking about in my classes. And so I'm hoping that you all will have some questions at the end that about some of these skill areas. But one of the things I began to realize as I was thinking about these speaking and listening skills and thinking about talking to you guys today is that really these speaking and listening skills have to be practiced across multiple communication contexts whenever we're anticipating or having a difficult conversation with someone. And the first place that we really have to think about these skills is our self-talk. What I say to myself about a person who's different than me oftentimes becomes how I choose to interact with them. So I see one of my high school buddies that I went to high school with on Facebook post something, and my immediate, I feel like sometimes I'm a cat, that the the fur on my back just immediately comes up, and I want to just lash out at them. And what I don't stop to think about at that point is what is going on in my head about them. I remember this with the COVID-19 things that were happening, and I'd have people posting, you should wear a mask or you shouldn't wear a mask, or, you know, this is all a fake, or this is actually science-based. And I'd see all of those, and if I could realize, okay, what is it that I'm saying in my head about the people that I'm disagreeing with? Because it's those things I'm saying in my head that actually impact how I choose to respond. So I think sometimes we forget, whenever we are in getting ready to think about having a conversation with somebody that's different than us, we forget about the self-talk area. We also sometimes forget about the conversations that we have with people that are like us. So I was at just a social event Friday evening. We were socially distancing. We were outside, but we were all talking about the Supreme Court nominee that was probably going to be made today or yesterday, but this was Friday. And there was one person there that was actually knows a lot of law. And so I wanted their opinions on kind of what they thought about this nominee. And, you know, it was very easy to get into talking bad about the other side, because all of us were kind of on that. And so it's easy to get caught up in that, to actually remember that sometimes we need to also be checking our communication and the things that we're saying in the conversations within our groups. The word tribes has actually come up in the last couple of 3 years, where people have been talking about the people that are like us are our tribes. That's the people that we hang with. And so we also have to be looking at the communication that's happening within our own groups. And of course, then there's the communication that that we have with the person that we consider to be other. The thing that I find interesting about labeling anyone as other, though, is that we often have things in common with them. The problem is that we label them in groups that are their apparent groups. So let's just take Republican and Democrats, for example. If you're a Democrat and you label somebody just as a Republican, then you're going to see them in a certain way. But reality is they have a lot more to their identity than just being Republican. So I think about my own identity, for example, being Christian, being a professor, being a woman, being married, having children, all being white, all of those things impact who I am and my belief system. So it's much, much more than just being Republican or Democrat. And so we oftentimes have a lot more in common than that one label that we use. And so I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about, or just briefly kind of bringing up the whole issue of communication context. We're going to move into speaking and listening behaviors now, because I think if we don't recognize where we can practice these behaviors, then it becomes very difficult sometimes to think about practicing them in a individual conversation. So in an individual conversation, you end up having all of these things happening. The conversations that preceded that conversation, the self-talk, the conversations that preceded that conversation within your group or the people that hold similar opinions, and then the conversations that preceded that individual conversation with other people that are different than you. And so sometimes you expect those kinds of things to happen again in the individual conversation. So we often have to, something that Braver Angels calls depolarize within. That means that I recognize my own biases, my own polarization, and I have to think about that before I ever can communicate well with the other person. So let's take a look at some listening and speaking skills. And as I go, if you have questions about what I've been talking about, write them down so that you remember to ask them when I quit sharing my screen and we have time for questions and answers. So we're going to talk first about listening skills, and then we're going to talk about speaking skills, and then a little bit about difficult conversations, and then I'll give you some resources, and then we'll go into questions and answers. All right, so let's look at listening skills first. And most of the times, the people that I've found that are part of, actually, I think every single person that I've ever met or known that is living in Hot Springs Village, whether they go to your church or not, is very well educated. I don't know if you have found that or not. And so I don't think anything that I'm going to be telling you here today is something new. I think everything thing that I'm probably going to tell you today is something that you've heard before. But the problem is that we forget it when we're in the heat of the moment of having difficult dialogues or conversations. And so these are going to be reminders for you about things that you already do probably really well with people that you connect with, that you're friends with, but they also are going to be things that maybe that you can improve on. So that's what I want you to think about. So I've already kind of mentioned this, to be aware of your self-talk. We're going to talk in a little bit about some things that we do in terms of our self-talk that are negative, but first of all, being aware and bringing it to your level of awareness of what am I saying about the other person. I oftentimes, because I tend to be an introvert and tend to have a little bit of anxiety about communicating with people, I oftentimes will play through the conversations in my mind ahead of time that I'm going to be having with someone. I don't know if any of the rest of you do that, but I kind of imagine what that would be like. And even in that, sometimes, it never really happens the way that I anticipate, but that's what I sometimes do. And I think being aware of what it is that I'm saying about that other person, or what I think they're going to say, is important to be aware of. One of the things that I do that is a physical thing, and I heard this actually from a colleague of mine that does some work on positive communication, and he talked about that when he was in a difficult meeting, and this would have been like a work meeting, but when he was in a difficult meeting, what he would do is he would actually physically open his hands underneath the table. And the whole idea of opening your hands is, to me, it's a beautiful picture, because if I can open my hands, that means I'm willing to receive. So we think about it in a religious setting. If I'm opening my hands while I'm in a worship setting, then I'm receiving. But in a interpersonal or relationship setting, if I'm opening my hands, that also means that I am actually willing to receive from you as a beautiful human being, regardless of whether you were beautiful before we encountered each other in terms of the way that you were behaving, but as a human being that's worthy of life. And so opening the hands, and you think about if you're not opening the hands and you start, somebody's disagreeing with you and you start kind of feeling your shoulders get tight, and your hands actually sometimes are kind of like this. Well, that's that fight. We can't go and hit them like we would have when we were little, but we can open our hands. So physically, if I'm in a difficult space in a conversation or in a meeting, I will literally open my hands under the table. And that is my reminder to be willing to listen to what is coming and to be able to recognize this person as another human being made by God that has a divine nature within them. Another step that I take whenever I am in a difficult dialogue and listening is I try to paraphrase. And what that means is just basically repeating back what I hear them saying. So I remember having a difficult dialogue with a student that was very upset with the fact that I teach speech classes, so was requiring them to have a clear organization to their speeches. And she said to me, she came to me after class and she said, I'm so you know, I just can't believe you're making us do this. This is cutting out all the creativity that I've ever had. And so I found myself getting like the cat again, kind of that tension in my shoulders. And I finally thought, you know, I got to practice what I tell my students to do in good listening. And so I started repeating back what I heard her saying. I said, so it sounds like that you are upset that my organization is causing you to, it's really it's making you lose your creativity. Yeah, that's what I'm upset about. And so then she went on a little bit more, and then I paraphrased some more. You know, half of solving a conflict is having the other person know that we really listen, that we really understand where they're coming from before we ever try to find a solution. And so that paraphrasing was very powerful. We were eventually able to come to you know, she had to recognize that I was the teacher and that I had some criteria, but I didn't start and lead with, hey, this is mine. You know, I'm the teacher after all. Why would you question me? I didn't lead with that because that would have just caused her more anger. I had to recognize the anger and the feelings. So the paraphrasing is not just what they say, but also the feelings that you think that they are expressing. And then the last one is sometimes we then have some questions. We really just need to clarify some things. So sometimes I'll say, so what would help you here? What would you like to get out of this? You know, and just to ask genuine questions. And genuine means that I really want to know, right? I might actually choose to change some things based on what they said, as opposed to, well, why would you say that? That's not a genuine question. So there are some listening things that we can do when we're in these difficult dialogues that are helpful. But there also are some speaking skills that we can use. And so let's go through those. And one of the ones that we use in communication a lot is to use I language. And that basically means that I'm taking responsibility for what I'm thinking and feeling. So I might say, I feel this, or I think this, or I would like this. And it just gets us away from the you language. You think that? You have that opinion? You are like that? You support that? Okay. As soon as we start using you language, it's like we're pointing our finger at them and we're getting right in their face. And maybe we're not actually pointing our finger, but you know what it feels like to have somebody actually point their finger at you and say, you did that. Okay. And using the I language just takes us away. It takes our responsibility. It shows that this is what it is that we are interested in sharing, and it's our thought, it's our opinion. Another thing that helps in speaking skills is to share life experiences. I love to hear the stories. Clyde was sharing a little bit about his music background. And, you know, if I would just sit and listen to Clyde, I bet he would have some amazing stories, and all of you would, about kind of what brought you to where you are today, even what brought you to be a part of this congregation, what brought you to believe what you believe. But it takes time to actually sit across and be wanting to really open up your heart to listen to those life experiences. Now, it needs to go both ways, right? If you self-disclose something, then you expect the other person to also want to self-disclose or to self-disclose their story. So you ask a question about, how is it that, you know, that you came to that opinion? How is it that you've experienced that? I remember sitting in a workshop with Braver Angels, and I was in a group of people that were actually talking about their experiences. And this woman was talking about her views on immigration and how she actually grew up in a certain part of the country, and actually in her situation, her mother or her grandmother, one, was an illegal immigrant. Okay. So automatically she has a story that has impacted her point of view. In another a situation we were talking about the police and um, what should be done to transform or to work on police violence. And this woman spoke up and said that she had been in a police officer and a sheriff for many, many years. And so all of a sudden, I listened to her in a different way than I would have listened had it just been an opinion that hadn't been informed. But she had to share that she had that life experience in order for me to be willing to listen in a certain way. Another thing that you can do when you're speaking, this really relates to listening, but acknowledging the other person's viewpoint. So is there anything at all that you see in their viewpoint that you have in common? Maybe you both value life, value peace, value safety. You know, what are the things that you see that you have in common with the other person? And that's important. And then lastly, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, the four horsemen of polarization. Now, this whole idea of the four horsemen, that comes out of the book of Revelation in the Bible. And there are, kind of feel like we're going through this right now. They're plagues, basically, that happened, and they're coming, and it brings destruction, right? So a researcher by the name of John Gottman, Gottman, has done a lot of work on the four horsemen that lead to marriages and relationships dissolving. Now, this particular combination of behaviors is a little different than what he came up with, but he actually believes that he can predict divorce by watching an hour-long conversation between a couple. Because of the things that they're doing. So Bill Doherty, who is the kind of the academic side of Braver Angels, came up with an adaptation of these horsemen for polarization. And polarization is, whenever we are so in our sides, in our boxes, in our tribes, in our groups, that we just don't want to talk to anybody on the other side. And so if we can be aware as when we're speaking to avoid these four, and so I'm going to talk about them briefly. The first one is stereotyping. And that particular one is whenever we only view another person as a member of a group. So let's say that I see a police officer on the street and I think of them only as the police, and I don't see them as any other identity. Or you see somebody that has a head covering, and they are Muslim, and you think of them only as Muslim. Okay. Or you see somebody that has a sign, maybe a neighbor that has a sign in their yard, and they're supporting a particular political candidate, and you see them only as Republican or Democrat. Okay. Anytime we group a person in only one particular grouping, then we are stereotyping. We believe that they are like the worst parts of that group.
Yeah.
And that's hard. You don't want to be, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you don't want to be considered to be like the worst parts of your group. So we have to be careful of doing that to others. The second horseman of polarization is dismissing. And that's when we don't even give voice to the person. We don't choose to listen to them. We basically, I'll have to be honest, I do this sometimes with people on Facebook. You snooze them because you can't stand, or you block them because you can't stand what they're saying. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I'm saying, though, that if we completely do that with the other side, then we choose not to listen to them at all, then we have polarized and actually really taken ourselves only to our side. And so dismissing the point of view, even if it's difficult. The problem is that oftentimes that point of view comes across as so negative and very dogmatic that it's hard to listen to. It's the way that they're sharing that point of view that we actually are reacting as much as what it is that they are actually saying. A third horseman is ridiculing, and this often happens when we are within our own group. Can you believe that they said that? Ha 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 ha. And you're making fun of them. You use words that actually you would never use towards people that you value. And so ridiculing is making fun of. And then we have contempt, where we really have come to the point where we hate. Now, I hate to hate anybody. I don't want to hate anybody. But I'll be honest, in this time of political divide, it is very easy to hold contempt. I don't want to call it hatred because that sounds awful, but it is very easy to hold contempt towards people who we believe have that point of view. And so if we really do some self-analysis inside and think about that, that means what we've done is we have basically said, I am not going to be with you. I'm not going to have any interaction with you. You are not worthy of my attention and respect. Now, none of us would ever want to say that we do that. And yet I know I do that. So I have to, using some religious terms, I have to repent, I have to turn, I have to change my behavior. So I'm getting ready to wrap it up here so we have time for questions. There are times in which we're actually in difficult moments that we find ourselves maybe holding a little bit of contempt. We're finding ourselves stereotyping, ridiculing. And so at that point, it's good to breathe. You know, they talk about this in yoga, breathing and listening, opening of those hands up, listening to yourself and to the other person. It's also helpful at that moment to get people to share personal stories, because if you start being able to hear their background, then all of a sudden they become more human. They aren't the other that I don't want to listen to anymore. They actually have a story that I begin to understand. But sometimes we have to exit the conversation in a low-key way, if needed. So there are some action steps that we can take. There is, and I'm going to put this in a little bit, this link in the chat box so that you don't have to try to copy it down here when I get out of sharing my screen. But there is a With Malice Towards None pledge, and it was the language that I used earlier that can help us remember some of these things that we've been talking about. You can also try out these skills in a safe place. So maybe in your own community, you could arrange one-on-one conversations that have some of these speaking and listening skills that you practice sharing with people that have a little bit different experiences than you. I'm going to tell you about some Braver Angels workshops that we're going to actually be putting on in the Central Arkansas, from the Central Arkansas Alliance here in a minute, that you could attend if you wanted to. I know Meg has attended some. So here are some that actually we're going to be doing on the first Monday of the next 3 months, and my email address I'm also going to be putting in the chat as well. But Peg has got it, Meg has got it, Dane's got it. So if you somehow miss getting it, then you can also get my email address from them. But if you're interested, we're going to have a panel discussion talking more about the whole issue of polarization. I'll be talking more about communication skills similar to what I've shared today. Then we're going to have some practice having one-on-one conversations that might be difficult with people that are different than us. But we're going to have some guidelines about how to do that. And we're going to do that right before the election day, Monday before the election. And then I'm going to be leading, along with another colleague of mine from Braver Angels, a Depolarizing Within workshop, in which we will be talking about those 4 horsemen of polarization and about how to depolarize within. When you're starting to feel contempt towards the other side, how can I actually be aware of what's going on within my own self-talk, in my own group, and actually try to work towards being able to have ways of being able to communicate with them in more detail. So that is my talk for the day. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and actually go back into